It's a tough time for the country at the moment, for individuals, even for companies where growth is an issue or they're laying off staff by necessity. And the Chancellor really needs to have a good think about how to use the tools that are at his disposal at this point in time to encourage growth in the economy, to ease the burden on people during the cost of living crisis. And so our intention today is to go out to the street and get a sense of the general public's view when it comes to what the Chancellor can and cannot do. And my sense really as a tax lawyer is to try and understand what the general public is thinking. I'm interested in tax not just because I advise on it, but because ultimately it is a question of public policy and it affects all of us. There are going to be a bunch of issues that we're looking to discuss today. How we're going to deal with this debt that's built up since COVID times. So issues around, can we introduce a wealth tax? If we were to introduce it, conceptually it sounds fantastic, but mechanically how does it work? So let's go out, let's find out what the public thinks. Hope you enjoy. So we're going around the streets, we're having chats with people about what the Chancellor could do, thinking about the nature of the economy at the moment, the cost of living, all of the issues that have been arising in normal people's lives. What can the Chancellor do to ease the burden of debt that's built up over the last few years through the COVID debts? Apparently you've got some ideas.
Well, I think that my view would probably be that you have two choices. You either continue down the route that the Conservatives strangely have adopted, which is to continue to be a sort of Labour light, i.e. high tax, high spend economy, or you elect to do something truly conservative, which is the only real way they're ever going to sort of distinguish themselves from the other parties when it comes to the next election. So the idea of raising corporation tax to potentially 25% is nothing short of madness, because it's small businesses. We don't have any business in this country anymore. We don't have any manufacturing. The only way we're going to actually make a difference is to encourage small businesses to thrive.
Is there some sort of thing he can do around tax to help people?
Well, we know, they've been talking a lot about bringing the over 50s back into the workplace, right? So there are obviously tax incentives I think that bringing tax incentives back to bring older people back into the workplace would make a really big difference.
Right. What do you think he can do? Because taxes are very high at the moment.
Well, I think increasing corporation tax is actually the wrong move. Clearly, he's got a spreadsheet, and he's put something in his spreadsheet which says if I increase this tax rate for corporations, it will bring me this much money.
Yeah.
But I would have thought that is going to disincentivize companies in terms of investing.
What would you like him to do as a member of the public?
The idea about the debt doesn't particularly bother me. I think that can be dealt with through over time. I think certainly that the poorer people need more help. Housing needs to be controlled. I think the chance was missed during the pandemic to allow councils to raise council tax enormously. So I suppose there will have to be tax increases, which is fine. I'm happy to pay more tax.
So what sort of tax increase would you go for? What would be popular or possible?
I would say on certainly the upper band, I'd raise that maybe a couple of percent, and maybe
for income tax.
For income tax, VAT, no, I wouldn't raise
that because
that hits the poorest. But and then, like I said, for local services, allow councils to raise council tax even more, especially like where I live, slightly further west from here. My council tax is ludicrously low for what it should be.
Do you agree with the current Chancellor? Do you agree with the current approach?
Well, I think he's doing whatever he can at the moment. I mean, yes, as you rightly just said, there is a cost of living crisis, not only here, but where I live as well, and in Europe, everybody is putting up with it at the moment.
Yeah.
So this is not the moment to start upsetting the apple cart, so to speak.
No, of course, but the status quo is arguably not suiting people either. Something needs to be done to ease that crisis for people on a day-to-day basis.
You reckon there should be tax cutting? Is that what your opinion?
I'm not allowed to espouse views because I work for a law firm and we don't endorse any political views.
Well, the views of some of your friends might be that we should be cutting taxes.
Some of my clients would possibly say that.
And how are you going to pay for things if you start cutting taxes? Taxes are there to fund various fairly important things, infrastructure, roads, schools, hospitals. All of these things need to be paid for. People do believe that somehow it grows on trees. No, you've got to tax people.
So one of the things that we've been discussing with people today is novel forms of taxation. And one of the ideas that's been kind of kicked around for generations now, but never truly been implemented, and where it's not been implemented very well, is a wealth tax. So a tax on unrealised gains, a tax on those with the broadest shoulders.
Yes.
What's your view of that?
I think it's an excellent
idea. Is it the time
to tax
now?
Such people. Yes, why not? And a wealth tax, mind you, when they put a wealth tax on in France, it was Hollande, I believe's government, the socialist government, that raised, naturally, a lot of hackles, and it was exceedingly unpopular. But then a wealth tax is always going to be unpopular.
I think the issue with it is, how do you define wealth? How would you define wealth?
Well, gosh, upwards of a certain number of millions, I would say.
So
I
you
don't
sort
know
of
how many, but
you
somebody,
find
you would know that better than me.
Possibly. So you find a threshold,
Yes.
and then you determine that all assets are taxed, because you might, for example, have
Your
some
house,
old
yeah.
antiques. Well, you have a house, which is difficult, right?
Yeah.
So you've lived in London for years and years, and 95% of your wealth, inadvertently, is now sort of caught up in bricks and mortar, and you don't have the cash to pay it. So it's possibly going to penalise certain individuals in society who have just become wealthy,
Well,
whatever wealthy means, by
yes.
virtue of living in a property over a certain period where the area has been regenerated.
Yes.
But then, what about if you've got an art collection that you've inherited from someone, or you've built up because you just loved it? And
Tough.
so how do you get it valued?
Bring in a couple of experts to value your...
Every year?
It has to be every year, does it?
Possibly.
Then yes, then you have to do that. wouldn't
So-
you? So this is going to cost money, you're saying. I mean, actually running a scheme like this, of having somebody value your Botticellis and your...
Well, we'd create a lot of new jobs,
Buffet,
wouldn't we,
whatever.
in the economy as well?
Yeah. Well, the idea sounds like a good one, but it may be putting it into practice will be just as complicated and expensive as almost any other
I think
form
that's
of
always been
taxation.
the issue. And then, the number of disputes that are going to arise, HMRC having to get more staff in order to work out if someone is not paying their wealth tax in the right way.
That is
If you were to introduce it, and I'm saying you as if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer now, maybe you will be, maybe you'll come back to the UK and grace us with your presence.
yes.
If you were to introduce a wealth tax, would you do it as a kind of big lump sum and say, look, we've got £500 billion worth of debt, let's just wipe it out now. Let's choose what
No,
we
I think I'd stagger it.
So you do it on like a kind of yearly
I would
basis?
stagger it, not
Okay.
necessarily yearly, but say every 5 years, but something like that, not in one fell swoop. No.
You pay tax on your income, you then pay tax on the interest you get on the savings of what you keep back from your earnings, and then you save that, you live your life, you pay your way through all your life, and then if you've got some left over, they want 40% tax on it. Forget it. No, it shouldn't be that way.
Right.
The world would be a better place if people were properly rewarded for the work they do and were taxed less so they can keep it and fund their lives the way they want to.
I mean, people often talk about the weight being carried by those with the broader shoulders, those able to carry the burden of tax. And not that we would necessarily see it with this government, but possibly with the future Labour government, is the concept of a wealth tax. And it's been spoken about for generations now, and it's been tried in different countries, not always to much success. What are your views conceptually on a wealth tax?
Yeah, it is. You're right. That is very difficult because you can't ask someone who's been living in their flat for 50 years to sell it or pay a huge amount of tax because it's increased in value, which obviously they benefited from. They haven't realised that anyway because they're still living in the same place. So, yeah, I agree. That is rather difficult. I mean, is there a way of getting around that by, for instance, on the street I live in, there's some empty houses. Tax those at some extraordinary percent, and they're not being used. Second homes, like that, I suppose, because that seems slightly ludicrous when there are people struggling or people searching for houses.
I think I know where you're going to stand on this, and I don't think there's any chance this will be introduced next week, or possibly in the budget after that, and the budget after that. There is a concept that has often been kind of kicked around, which is the idea of a wealth tax being introduced. I think I know where you stand, but just talk me through.
Well, no,
if it were to be introduced, how would it work? What are the mechanics of it?
I'm not as traditional. I naturally lean towards the right, but fundamentally I'm a pragmatist at heart. I mean, I've spent my whole life working I run a very big charitable institution. I do get the whole thing about the haves, the have-nots, but the trouble is, it's how much can you squeeze? There comes a point where, for example, the whole of the Labour government, unless I'm missing the point, was run on, I think, a 40% tax, and then Gordon Brown, rather spitefully on purpose, left the bomb, and then the Tories, rather sheepishly, with Nick Clegg, took it down to 45. So they've remained a very high tax government. If you tax people like me will find a way around it.
Sure.
And so you can wealth tax all you want, but it backfires. We know that there's a sweet spot in economic terms of what people are prepared to put up with. So people like me who are the haves, the lucky, the fortunate few, if you keep on pushing, we will always find a way around it, and you'll never react quick enough. And so the truth is, it's madness. So wealth taxes don't work. They're just the politics of envy. which is what we're seeing in the whole of sort of tedious. It's quite interesting to see Starmer is quite, again, this fight for the middle ground. It's this fight to try and capture the middle ground.
Yeah.
And I think that what we're seeing now that Corbyn's gone, and the right have never been that right, actually, contrary to being portrayed as such. So I think that it's kind of irrelevant who runs this country. They're all, frankly, sadly, tragically, not up to the job. And we have a paucity of ambitious politicians with a vision. And so basically we're stuffed.
I kind of feel a bit sorry for any sort of incumbent chancellor right now, because he's got to deal with not just issues around growth, but issues around debt. We've got something like £500 billion worth of debt that we've built up through overspending during COVID.
Yeah,
how do we plug that?
with rising interest rates.
With rising interest rates. How do we plug that? People talk about, the broadest shoulders and all this kind of stuff.
I mean, there's always this conversation about windfall tax on the energy companies, isn't
Sure.
there? I think that's
what about a wealth tax?
complicated. I mean, I'm not massively pro a wealth tax. For me, honestly, the problem with a wealth tax is that if it includes the value of your primary property,
Sure.
living in central London, the likelihood is that your primary property is going to have a significant value.
It might be 95% of your wealth.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So,
and you might have lived there for generations as well. It doesn't necessarily mean that you were wealthy always.
Or even if you haven't and you've struggled to buy this one place that you want to live and
Sure.
you don't have like loads of other savings and wealth. So I think a wealth tax would have to just take that into account. I think the other problem with wealth tax, honestly, is if you've accumulated wealth while paying PAYE at 40% or whatever, then, and use that, and saved your money effectively to save for your future and retirement, then being taxed on it again feels a bit scary.
We're back. We've been out for a few hours. We're freezing cold, but we've had a fantastic experience just talking to people in the public about what they really feel. Now, as you will have seen, there are political views. We're not political, we're lawyers. But what we're really trying to delve into here is that with tax, and I know this on a daily basis, it's not just about what the tax is and paying the tax, but there's often an emotional element to it, and for people it is actually, there's a story behind it. They've arrived at a certain point where they're being taxed in a certain way, and that's maybe because they've built up wealth over a lifetime or over several generations, or they're seeking to build that wealth and they're trying to understand it, but it's personal ultimately. So look, by the time this goes out, the budget will have happened and we'll wait and see. But nonetheless, it was still incredibly interesting just to be out there and get a sense of people's views and the way in which tax really touches their life. So I hope you enjoy the video, subscribe, and we'll see you soon.